Hi, my name is David Chace. I'm an illustrator and a researcher. I draw alien beings based on people's alien encounter experiences. I talk to them about their experiences of alien visitation or abduction or contact or communication. Anytime when they get a visual of what the alien looks like, whether through physically seeing it or through some kind of mental impression. And I've been doing this for over 20 years. When I was a child, I used to go out into the woods and catch lizards and snakes. I used to catch frogs too. I drew animals. I drew dinosaurs. In kindergarten, I got really into dinosaurs and started drawing dinosaurs. And then in my teen years, I became interested in UFOs and aliens, and so the reptilian aliens were a natural fit for me, given where I started. I worked with an experiencer, I'll just call him Robert, it's not his real name, but he had an experience in the early 80s, July 1981, at the age of 16, in which he was in his backyard. It was a clear sunny day, and this was in Washington State. He was out playing with his dog, and there was a big field in the back of his house. Suddenly, it became really windy, and these clouds started to move in. These kind of dark, ominous clouds, and it looked like something was moving behind the clouds. It was very much like in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the UFOs use kind of a cloud screen to camouflage themselves. And Robert saw what he thought was lightning, and so he was running to the back door to get into the house. The dog ran inside, and before Robert could get inside, this beam of light hit him and started to lift him. And he recalls, under hypnosis, he recalled seeing the kind of the city lights of Seattle below him as he was taken up into this craft. Now, his conscious memory of waking up the next morning, and then within a couple days of that, he began feeling really sick and nauseous, and he actually went to the hospital. But later on, he learned under hypnosis that he had had a whole experience aboard the craft. He met a being, a female being, who told him her name was Urani, which phonetically we spell it Y-U-R-A-N-I as a possible spelling. So Robert described Urani as being about 5'7" tall, a very thin, frail-looking body with broader shoulders, a large head, kind of a mongoloid-looking face. He described it with sort of a big cheeks, kind of Asian features, very pale skin, small flat nose. The ears were reduced. The hands were 3 fingers with a thumb, and Urani was telepathic, very powerful mind. Robert's experience with her and her people seemed to be an entire week. He actually was taken to their planet, described another world with a reddish sun, round buildings, and at the end of that experience, he was taken home. Urani came in, brought him into his house, and laid him down in his bed. But then he discovered the next morning that it actually was the next morning. So even though he'd been away on this other world for what seemed like several days, he was actually only away from his home on Earth for one night, which does suggest, and that's come up in many cases, the implication that these beings are time travelers, or they can slip into another dimension or something, and time is not necessarily the same for them as it is for us. Another case of a somewhat similar looking being to Urani was this case, a small humanoid being. I think he was maybe 4 feet tall. This was seen by a gentleman who was in the Army. He was doing security work for the NSA. He was actually working security at the underground portion of an NSA base, and this was in 1969. He described a being with a bald head, very large eyes, with kind of a blue-gray iris. The being seemed light sensitive. So what was happening is there was a tour going on where some diplomats or VIPs were being led through this facility, and someone was explaining to them how we're doing research on various new technologies, and this group of aliens is actually helping us with the technical aspects of this research. So during the experience at the NSA base in '69, there was a telepathic communication with, my friend wasn't privy to that communication, although he kind of picked up on what was being said. And he has had his own alien encounters, which makes you wonder if they choose people to work these security details where aliens are involved on the basis of them being somehow selected, that because they're already familiar with the phenomenon. The being wore kind of a silver suit, and his pupils, very large pupils that could not contract fully in the light. But this suggests that aliens and humans are working together in some sort of situation underground. Now, of course, some would say, well, why would aliens, if they're so far in advance beyond us, need to work with humans? So why would a technologically superior species that can abduct people at will, can erase people's memories, why would they work with human beings? And that's a great question. And certainly it raises questions about the connections we have with these beings. Perhaps, you know, if we do have soul connections to them, if they're part of our star family, perhaps we're already working with them at some level. And it's hard to say whether this is a human thing or an alien thing, who's really in charge, and how did this all get started. There was a case from 1995. A woman was abducted with a friend who she worked with, so they were both able to kind of corroborate the experience for each other afterwards and give each other some confirmation, where she was taken to a military base in the American Southwest. On the base, she saw several abductees, perhaps dozens, and they were all lined up, and there was this being who is a doctor who seemed to be a supervisor, and he was in charge of the operation, or at least this portion of it, and they were all going through the line and going to him. So as the people were escorted through the line, they got to this being. My friend described how she actually had her consciousness like removed from her brain somehow and put into a small box as part of this experience. And there are some very strange aspects to this experience. Of course, one of the strange things is this being who is clearly, he looked like a hybrid. He had a thin neck. He seemed to have a larger cranium, no indication of hair at all, kind of a crystal gray iris. He was wearing a uniform, a greenish uniform with a lapel that looked almost like something from the Civil War. But he was in charge over the military, like the MPs, and he was involved in this operation, this joint human ET operation, or whatever it was. Skeptics on the issue of aliens and humans working together would point out that oftentimes people have screen memories, and that perhaps when people see humans working with aliens, perhaps the aliens, the humans that they see are actually aliens that are being screened or disguised as humans. And then there are other possibilities. There are actually a lot of possible explanations for these experiences, but just have to pay attention to a large number of cases, and when things keep coming up again and again, you ask for those details, and over time you can kind of feel your way through to get some sense of what is happening in these different cases. And we just have to be very patient with it, keep an open mind, consider all the possibilities. One of the first cases I had of a reptilian is a being we call Vectra. This is actually the case of a woman named Garnett Doonan. She had several experiences during from the late 80s throughout most of the 90s until around 1998. She had an experience where she was taken to what seemed to be an underground base. It may have actually been in the Puget Sound. And in this experience, at one point she was wandering freely through the base. She was not with an escort. And occasionally people do describe these experiences where they kind of get some ability to roam freely through a craft or through a base, and we wonder why that is. Garnett was wandering on her own. She came to a place where she saw ahead of her that there was this big, muscular, very powerful reptilian being, this humanoid, and he was like pure strength. And he was standing in the entranceway to this room. And Garnett, as she continued to approach towards him, she started to slow down, and he turned towards her and started to go into a deep crouch. And he put out this feeling. She sensed that if she got closer and tried to enter the room, that he would have mauled her and killed her. That was his job, was to guard that room from all comers. So it was almost like an animalistic sense. She didn't get the sense that he was really intelligent beyond just having this job to guard the room. And so she slowed down and eventually came to a stop. She was, several feet away from this being, and then a smaller being, a small humanoid, came to her and kind of took her by the hands and said, telepathically, "Okay, we have to go now." And he took her back to where she belonged with her familiar being, Astartlia. Now, Astartlia is a beautiful, radiant light being. You could call her a light being. She does have what appears to be a solid form, but she glows from within, perhaps like a firefly or something. Her body emits its own light. Now, Astartlia is incredibly beautiful. She's kind of a hybrid-looking being. She looks a little bit like a cross between a human and a gray, but with cat-like pupils, vertical pupils. Blue iris, beautiful blue eyes, and she just glows with this white light. Astartlia's hair is like an Egyptian-style wig. We believe it's a wig, and it's white, and it's kind of cut across the top and it comes down, and it's kind of like some of those depictions you see of Cleopatra, but white hair, and kind of frizzy or wavy. Astartlia Garnett has encountered Astartlia in the out-of-body or the astral state, where Garnett was whisked away from her physical body during a meditation, gone into some place which turned out to be the inside of a mountain, and interacted with Astartlia in that second state, that astral state. But again, you can see the astral body looks the same as what apparently is her physical body when she materializes in Garnett's home. Astartlia levitates above the ground a few inches. She doesn't actually walk like we do. And there are several cases in which beings are described to levitate a few inches above the ground rather than walking on the ground. Of course, there are also those that do walk and touch the ground. Astartlia, when Astartlia appears in Garnett's home, there were specific areas where what would happen is you would have a swirl of pastel-colored lights and little sparks that would move around. And then the air would change, and Astartlia would step into the home almost as if stepping out from behind a curtain. So the way Astartlia enters the home is one example of what might be called a portal, although in her case you can't actually see anything when the portal is there. There is a brief light show that takes place, some luminescent effects when the portal appears, and then it's just like Astartlia materializes as if stepping out from behind a curtain. Going back to Garnett's experience, Astartlia, who is around 6.5 to 7 feet tall, and she always levitated a little bit above the ground, she was often accompanied by a smaller being, kind of a small hybrid-looking being or humanoid, kind of a squat dwarf being with a round head and little kind of goose pimples on the top of his head, who had dark eyes, and she called this being Dehemi. Now Dehemi would glow just as Astartlia would glow, but Dehemi's glow is dimmer. So Dehemi wore kind of a smoky blue robe and looked kind of like a small hybrid. Now Garnett has actually seen Dehemi, I forget, putting in or taking out these lens covers that cover his eyeballs, and underneath she could see there is actually a vertical pupil, although it's wide, and so he does actually have eyes, pupils and an iris that are underneath the dark eyes. The feeling that Garnett got from Dehemi was indifference, humorlessness, seriousness. So she much preferred Astartlia's unconditional love. In addition to Astartlia, there are several other beings who have been described as coming through a sort of portal like that. One is a reptilian that we call Captain. That's his nickname. And he's a very friendly being. He has a sense of humor. He can laugh. He's perhaps 7.5 feet tall. Maybe close to 8 feet tall. He's very muscular, and he's probably one of the most muscular type reptilians that's been described to me. So very big, very dark colored scales, almost black, sometimes described as coffee bean color, like dark coffee bean. There's one primary witness, a woman who has encountered Captain, and her physical interactions with him seem to be back in the early 90s, around 1990, 91, 92. But Captain would come through a portal, which was kind of like a circular patch of light. The woman describes the portal as looking like the full moon almost, but sitting on the ground. And this portal is just a way that Captain can enter our space-time, our dimension, coming from inside his craft or from another time or wherever it is he comes from, or whenever it is. He may be a time traveler. In her experience of Captain, there was a time when she was allowed to kind of inspect his body and look at his hands and the webbing and the talons, and she was describing how if you have the delicate webbing like that and you have these sharp talons, how do you avoid cutting your webbing? And Captain just thought that was the funniest thing. Like, apparently it's not a problem from him. He's very familiar with how to use his fingers. Captain explained to her, and of course this is all telepathic, the way that the communication occurs. He told her that he was delighted that you have accepted me, that you think I'm beautiful. And the scales, the coloration, the musculature. He is an incredibly beautiful being. The eyes with the iris that can change from a reddish to a gold color. All of Captain's features are beautiful, at least for someone like me who loves reptiles, and for my friend, the woman who's who's interacted with Captain. So Captain told her, I'm delighted that you've accepted me. And at that point, Captain's heart just opened up to her, and she felt this incredible unconditional love and total acceptance. Just waves and waves of love. They can love in ways that humans just cannot, not yet. And it's very similar to what Garnett described years earlier when she would be in the presence of Astartlia, that from Astartlia, Garnett would feel this unconditional love. So some of these beings are what we would call spiritually advanced beings. Of course, then Bud Hopkins would point out that what if that's a ruse? What if they can deceive us into feeling things that isn't genuine? To that, all I can say is people have to trust their own experience and make their own determination. If you've encountered one of these beings, you have to look at your own feelings and decide for yourself what you believe and how you feel about the beings you've interacted with. In 1994, kind of when I was starting out, when I'd had just a few cases of reptilians, one of the first ones I had was a being that we call Ruby. There was a hypnotherapist, a gentleman, who was doing a regression with a woman. During this regression, he actually saw on this woman's arm the impression of a 5-fingered hand and impressed into her skin. But he couldn't see a being there, so Ruby was either invisible or composed of some kind of force matter, kind of like in some of these haunting type experiences people describe. But at some point Ruby actually materialized. Now at this point, my friend did not know that Ruby was a reptilian. She was just standing there with her head bowed and her arms folded across her chest, and wearing a kind of a purplish red monk's robe. So she looked like a monk. And he asked her, "Are you a master teacher?" And she replied in a gravelly voice, which I believe was actually out loud rather than telepathic, if I remember the account correctly. "You may address me as such." And he asked further, "Are you of the light? Are you of Christ light?" And she remained silent. And it became apparent that Ruby was just getting annoyed or impatient, and at some point she took down her hood and threw her robe open, and what he could see underneath was a muscular reptilian being, although a female. So my friend described Ruby that she was kind of charcoal green-gray in color, with smooth scales. There seemed to be some flow or directionality to the scales directed away from her snout. The eyes were actually were red. The pupil itself was red, and as Ruby stood there staring at him, becoming angry with him, actually apparently she did not want him working with this particular abductee. And her pupils expanded as she became angry, dilating, and the whole eye turned this bright or deep red of the pupil as the pupil expanded to fill the eye. Now around the eye, the rim of the eye, was a beautiful yellowish color. Ruby had these beautiful colors. Between the scales on the lower eyelid, there was actually a powdery hint of aqua blue. And then the ridge down her forehead and above each eye was slightly lighter. The scales around her lips and ear openings were slightly lighter and more yellowish than the surrounding dark scales. Ruby was a beautiful reptilian, but her purpose in showing up there was to instill fear within my hypnotherapist friend, and he could feel that, and so he stood up to her. He was studying her and just trying throughout the the experience to not give fear where she was seeking fear. And she did not succeed in scaring him, although it certainly was startling to him to have a reptilian materialize during a hypnosis session. And at some point she just disappeared and was gone. So he succeeded there, and he did bring me a lot of details about exactly what she looks like, including her vest and an insignia that she wore. I just want to, in conclusion, say that the reptilians are, people have positive experiences with the unconditional love. People have frightening experiences. They are what they are. The reptilians, there's good and evil in all beings, the potential there in all beings. And for me, the interesting about the reptilians, the interesting thing is what they look like, their scale patterns, their anatomy. I study that, and while I'm studying that, I learn about people's experiences, and it's fascinating. And in time, I hope we, the human race, and some of these reptilians can work together in a more open manner than we do now.